What's up guys, it's Hunter Sitchy from CheckShopPoker.com, and the title of today's video is 3-betting, small blind versus big blind. And the reason I chose to do this video is because I got into a discussion with some of my high stakes friends about small blind versus big blind ranges and what you're trying to accomplish when you're 3-betting in position. And a lot of the discussion had to do with stack sizes and also balancing against 4-bets, balancing against check raises. And I felt like a lot of interesting things came up, and I felt like you guys could gain quite a bit if I did a video on it. So with that being said, let's just jump into the content here. So as always, I like to start from the beginning. So let's say that we're in a 5-10 game and it folds all the way around to the small blind. And the reason I chose to do a 5-10 game is because you're not going to see any small blind versus big blind action in a 1-2, a 1-3, or a 2-5 game, and it's simply because the rake is so high. So if it gets to the point where they're raking more than one big blind, if you see a flop, then it's basically going to be impossible for you to generate a long-term profit. If you have to win more than 100 big blinds per 100, because of the rake, then there's really no point in playing small blind versus big blind. Now 5-10 is different because you're playing with a time rake, so you're just paying $7 every half hour, and because of that, small blind versus big blind comes up quite a bit more because there are no rake considerations in the hand other than the amount of time that it would take to play the hand. So because of that, let's just say that we're playing 5-10, and for the remainder of this video, let's say that we're very deep, at least 300 big blinds deep. This has a lot to do with my argument for the ranges that I use when I'm 3-betting. So let's say that the small blind opens to 30. Now I'm going to show you what standard small blind opening range looks like. We've kind of determined in past videos that it looks like about 62 to 65%. Poker Snowy has figured out a way to be perfectly balanced, playing 62% of hands. Computers choose mixed strategies that involve limping, limp calling, limp folding, limp raising, and also just open raising. I'm not that good. I'm not capable of memorizing all of those permutations, so because of that, I choose to just open my entire range from the small blind, and it usually makes things quite a bit easier. So for the sake of this video, just assume that the small blind is opening about 62% of hands and there is no mixed strategy involved. Now, what is the small blind trying to accomplish here? Well, let's look at the math. So if he opens to 30, he's risking 25 to win 15. The small blind doesn't count because he already posted that. So the total pot is $40 after he raises, and if I take out a calculator right here and I type in 25 divided by 40, it's going to say 0.625. So if he can get me to fold 62.5% of the time, he's breaking even with any hand that he opens with, and then after that he's just gaining more value if he can figure out a way to outplay me post flop. So what do we learn from that? We learn that I need to be defending enough of the time that he can't make an auto profit. That's called 1 minus alpha, where 1 symbolizes 100% and alpha is the percentage of the time that my opponent needs me to fold to make an instant profit with all the worst hands in his range. So it gets a little bit more complicated here. This is in a lot of high stakes forums, but it's not that tough. I'll just explain it. So I'm going to save this number in memory recall. I'm going to press 1. 1 symbolizes 100%, and then I'm going to subtract that number. Memory recall, 62.5 equals this. So I need to be defending 37.5% of the time to prevent my opponent from making an instant profit with all the worst hands in his range. It's pretty simple. Now ideally I'd like to be defending quite a bit more often than that, and I'm certainly going to be because of the excellent pot odds that I'm getting. So if I move this here real quick, in order for us to continue in this hand, we need to risk $20 to win 40. We're getting 2 to 1. That means that I need 33% equity to continue in the hand. And I'm pretty much always going to have that percentage with a suited ace. I'm going to have that with any king or queen. I'm going to have that with any suited hand, any pair. I'm defending much more often than 37.5% of the time. And it's really just because small blind versus big blind, we're both playing wide ranges, we're both defending quite a bit, we're both 3-betting and 4-betting quite a bit, and that's why this situation is so interesting. Now, the discussion that I got into with some of my high stakes friends was which hands should you be 3-betting from the big blind, and how do you balance in those situations? And the answer isn't that simple because there's more than one way to balance in this spot, and I think that's what causes a lot of arguments, is because people don't realize that there isn't one specific, range that you could use to balance. There are a variety of ranges that you could use that would be very close to game theory optimal, and because of that, people are going to propose different theories about it, and more than one of them could be right. So I'm just going to show you what I do in this situation, and feel free to argue any way you want in the forums. I'd happily discuss this with anybody. I do this to learn. So, go ahead and comment in the forums. I'm going to go over to Flopzilla real quick and kind of show you what my 3-betting range looks like from the big blind here. So if we go over to Flopzilla, there are a couple things I can show you. First of all, this is what a standard small blind opening range is going to look like. If you look down here, it's about 66% of hands. Now you can rearrange the cusps of these ranges any way you want. I prefer suited hands because it's easier to determine their equity, and they also have more playability. They allow you to make more money on the turn and river. I think that's very important because the turn and river have the biggest pot size. Now, some guys like to add a little bit more high card value to their ranges, and that's also totally fine. There are merits for that. So if you wanted to add Queen 4 and Jack 6, 10 6, maybe a offsuit connector instead of some of these weaker suited hands, go ahead, knock yourself out. It doesn't really matter because the hands at the cusps of these ranges have very similar equity, so it's not a big deal. For the sake of this video, just assume that the small blind is opening a range something like that. And then let's think about how we want to construct our 3-betting range here. So again, remember that we want to be defending at least 37.5% of the time. If we're going to be defending, we want to be 3-betting. If we're 3-betting, we'd like to have a value range for sure. So if we had to pick a premium candidate for value betting, it would be aces because it has a huge equity edge against all of the hands in our opponent's range. If we keep going down the line, we can add kings, queens, jacks, tens. Once you start to get down to 9s and 8s, things get a little bit gray because, first of all, overcards are going to be coming off over 40% of the time. I think by the time you get down to 7s, it's over half the time. And it ends up creating a situation where you can't really go for 3 streets of value that often. And because of that, I prefer to flat with them and kind of put less money in the pot and use them for showdown value to kind of strengthen some of my checkback ranges. And you can argue either way for that, but that's usually what I'm doing. Now, if we wanted to add more value to our range, we could start talking about adding ace-king suited, ace-king offsuit. They both have big equity edges against our opponent's opening range. If you flop a pair, you always have top pair, top kicker. So they're definitely great candidates to 3-bet. You go down the line, ace-queen is similar, and it gives you board coverage on queen-high boards. Ace-jack, pretty much the same thing. It gives you board coverage on jack-high boards. I would add both of these. And we're starting to add quite a few combos to our range here, we're at 78 combos, and this is a pretty solid value betting range if we're three betting. And now it doesn't mean that we want to be three betting these 100% of the time. I actually use somewhat of a mixed strategy with this range of hands, and it's because it's important to be able to cover boards and also strengthen your flatting range a little bit by adding some of these hands occasionally. So if I had to kind of estimate how I'm randomizing this range of hands, I would say it looks something like this, where I've used the presets up here to say that I'm three betting aces through jacks 75% of the time, and I'm three betting ace king through ace jack suited 75% of the time, and then I'm three betting ace king, ace queen, and ace jack offsuit about 50% of the time. The reason I'm three betting these less often is because they're much more numerous than the suited components. They're actually 3 times more likely to occur. There are 12 combinations of each offsuit box over here and 4 combinations of each suited box over here. So because of that, I like to three bet them a little bit less often. It also helps me to kind of balance my three betting range a little bit, because on low boards where I have all these combos, if I was three betting 100% of these, it would be really hard to play, because I'd either have to fire with some of these, or I would have to check back and have a bunch of ace high in my check back range that allows my opponent to stab a little bit more. So because of that, I just tone it down a little bit, and this is kind of what my value three betting range looks like. You can throw tens in there if you want. It's kind of the swinging point for me. Either way, it's not going to make a huge difference. Tens can be three bet, tens can be flatted. It's not a big deal. Now, we need to kind of figure out how much value we have so we can start to determine what our light three betting range is going to look like. So if you take this range of hands and count the number of combos, or 45 combos in this pre-flop range, and if we're sitting 300 big blinds deep, I would say that it's very fair to assume that you can three bet light twice as often as you're value betting when you're sitting that deep, and I'll explain everything here, but for now just assume that we're trying to get to 90 combos of light three betting range. So if we had to pick hands that we'd like to three bet light with, I think that small suited aces would be a premium candidate, and I'll explain why here. So we're three betting with hands for value that we want to get 3 streets of value from. And if we're going to have, any chance of balancing, we need to also have hands in our light three betting range that can fire 3 barrels as a bluff. In order to fire 3 barrels as a bluff, you need to be able to flop a lot of equity, or be able to keep firing on boards that weaken our opponent's range. And ace deuce suited would be a great hand for that. It has high card value, so you're going to flop an ace quite a bit. That's going to have like 80% equity against your opponent's range. It doesn't mean you're going to be value betting with it. You can certainly check back with it and kind of play a 2-street game. You're also going to flop a flush draw 12% of the time. That's going to allow you to keep firing. You flop a gut shot quite a bit of the time, and overall it's very easy to interpret your equity, and you can fire 3 streets quite a bit of the time. The same goes for ace 3 suited, ace 4 suited, and ace 5 suited. They all have that suited connectedness with the high card value. Now we need to add a few more combos to get up to 90 combos of light 3 bets. So if I had to pick a few more hands, I would start with suited connectors. They don't have the high card value that suited ace does, but they do flop open-enders more often, and they also flop straight flush draws more often. And you can fire 3 barrels with straight flush draws and open-enders, and that's a big reason why I choose to 3-bet with them. So I would add 4-3 suited all the way up to 9-8 suited. I'd go down and add suited gappers as well. So 5-3 suited, 6-4, all the way up to 10-8 suited. And we're at 64 combos. We need to add a little bit more. Let's add suited double gappers. That gets us up to 88 combos if we go up to Jack 8 suited. Now the reason I choose to use the suited gappers and the suited double gappers is because they still flop straight draws. They flop fewer straight draws than suited connectors. So I've discussed this in other videos, but a hand like 8-6 suited can flop 3 straights, and a hand like 7-6 suited can flop 4 straights. But the straights that 8-6 suited flops are much more disguised than the straights that a suited connector flops. And because of that, I think that they have more implied odds, especially when stacks are super deep like they are in the example that I'm giving you. So that's why I add them. The same goes for suited double gappers. They're a little bit less valuable, but they certainly play much better than other hands that you could 3-bet light with. Now we're at 88 combos. I'm going to add a few more, so I'm going to go over here and add suited kings. Why do I choose king deuce through king 5 suited? It's because a deuce, a 3, a 4, and a 5 don't have very much showdown value. If I'm going to add hands to my flatting range, I'd prefer that the kicker have some showdown value, so I would take king 6, 7, 8, 9 and add those to my flatting range. And I'll take the high card value of king deuce through king 5 suited and use that for light 3-bets. That gets me up to 104 combos. That's too many, so I'm going to go ahead and use this weight preset at 50% and go ahead and put a half weight on all of these combos. The reason I'm choosing to do that is because I'd also like these to be in my flatting range about half of the time, so that I have some board coverage. So my flatting range can still flop straight flush draws. It can still flop open-enders. And I think that's very important. It's very important to be able to cover a variety of boards with both your 3-betting range and your flatting range. And since I did this before shooting this video, this adds up to exactly 90 combos. So my ratio of value 3-bets to light 3-bets is 2-to-1 in this situation. So now you guys probably have a few questions. So the first thing that comes to mind is, why am I 3-betting Jack 8 suited half the time and 4-3 suited 100% of the time? And it really just comes down to high card value. Jack 8 suited has some high card value. I'd like to throw that into my flatting range about half the time. 4-3 suited has no high card value. And because of that, I'd rather be 3-betting with it because I can't really call down if I fly with it. If I fly with it, I'm really just trying to flop a pair and hopefully put 0 bets in, or I'm trying to flop a draw and blast my opponent off his c-betting range. It's way easier to just 3-bet with this and be done with it. And the other thing that you're probably wondering is, why haven't I added hands like ace 10 suited and king queen suited to my range? I'm flatting king queen instead of 3-betting it for value, because if it flops top pair, it has top pair second kicker 100% of the time. And that's extremely valuable to have in your flatting range. It allows you to really strengthen that range and allow you to make more call downs. And then ace 10, a couple things here. First of all, if you look at ace king and you're trying to determine how often it's going to flop a pair and how often that pair is going to be top pair, well, you're always going to flop top pair if you flop a pair with it, and that's going to occur 29% of the time. Okay, if I switch this to ace 10 suited, you're still going to flop a pair 29% of the time. That's just universal. But it's only going to be top pair 22% of the time. The rest of the time it's either going to be middle pair or weak pair, and that's because the kicker is smaller. So when I'm going to be flopping just showdown value with about 25% of the time that I flop a pair, I'd rather just throw that into my flatting range and use it to kind of strengthen my my call down range. So that's why I'm not 3-betting with it. I also don't really need board coverage on 10 high boards when I 3-bet, because on a 10 high board I have jacks through aces. That's 24 combinations of overpairs. So I don't need to be able to flop top pair, top kicker on a 10 high board, because I have plenty of overpairs to compensate for that. So you're starting to see how this range kind of fits together. Now, the other thing that people are probably going to ask me is, why am I 3-betting light twice as often as I'm 3-betting for value? Well, it's when you're 300 big blinds deep, you can get away with so much more than when you're 100 big blinds deep, and here's why. So if I 3-bet to $90, I'm risking 80 to win 40. So I need my opponent to fold 2/3 of the time. 1 minus alpha is 33% right there. So my opponent needs to be defending at least 33% of the time to prevent me from making a snap profit with the weakest part of my range. And, a lot of players are just folding way too often to 3-bet, so I'll make an instant profit. The times that they're defending, great. I get to realize all my equity in position, fire the flop, check back if I want to. I'm in the driver's seat. Now, if my opponent decides to 4-bet with me, I need to make sure that I can defend enough of the time to prevent him from making an instant profit. It goes both ways. So if I fire up the calculator here again, let's say that my opponent is going to 4-bet to 270. So when he 4-bets to 270, he's risking 240 to win 120. And that means that he needs me to fold 2/3 of the time to make an instant profit, right? And you see that if I fire up my whole range over here again, I can fold all of my light 3-bets, and I'm still defending 1/3 of the time because it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So he cannot make an instant profit by 4-betting me. And if he decides to go with a smaller 4-bet size, so let's say he goes for the min 4-bet to 180, now I'm getting 3-to-1 on my call, and all of these hands have way more than 25% equity, so I'm not going to be folding laundry here. And I can call in position with huge implied odds with really deep stacks and attempt to outplay my opponent. Now, am I going to win 50% of the pots that I play with these hands? No, not at all. But the times that I do win a pot, it's going to be very big because my opponent is going to make a mistake on a later street. So that's kind of how this situation works. Now, if you compare this to a 100 big blind play, there's some really big differences. So first of all, if I 3-bet to 9 big blinds and my opponent goes up to 22 big blinds, he can handcuff me significantly because I have no good 4-betting size. I can't go up to 45 big blinds and then fold if he ships it for 100 big blinds, right? So I either need to flat or commit by shoving 100 big blinds. Now, I'm not really happy shoving 100 big blinds light. That's the worst sizing that I can get. So when he goes up to 22 big blinds, when we're 100 big blinds deep, he really handcuffs me and I just don't have any options. So I can't use all of these hands to 3-bet light with because if he goes small, I don't really want to peel 13 more big blinds because the SPR is too small for me to make money the times that I do flop really big with these. So I would actually scale this down to a 1-to-1 ratio and make it like 45 combos of light 3-bets and 45 combos of value 3-bets. If I had to do that, my light 3-betting range would look something like this, and I would weight them to add up to 45 combos. And the reason for that is because I just want that blocker value. Blocker value is much more important as stacks get shallow than it is to be able to flop a hand like an open-ender or a straight flush draw when stacks are really deep. So now you're starting to notice how things change between 100 big blinds and 300 big blinds and how I'm going to tailor my range so that I can perform better. So now I want to show you how a balanced 3-betting range carries over to create a balanced c-betting range. So let's say that we're 3-betting with all of these and our opponent calls. He chooses to defend with about half of his range. So like I said, I think his opening range looks something like this. And if he had to pick a defense range, I think he would call with hands like this. And I think he would 4-bet with his bigger value hands and then some small suited aces, and possibly some small suited connectors that would allow him to fire 3 streets at us a decent amount of the time. So for this example, just assume that he's calling with a range of hands like this. And then let's say a board like Jack 5-3 Rainbow comes off. This is a board that doesn't benefit either range very often, and it misses us quite a bit. So if we can figure out a way to balance on this board, then it's going to be really easy to balance on all the other boards where we can flop big draws, and on boards where there are bigger overcards. So let's go back to our range again. And when I'm doing this, I like to figure out how much value my range has. So let's start with the biggest hands that we have. That's going to be 2 pair here, 5-3. And let's eliminate the rest of this stuff for now. Let's get rid of all this. And let's get rid of ace king, ace queen. This is how much value we have. So remember that these are weighted. It ends up adding up to 25 combos. Now we're going to want to scale this back a little bit so that we have a little bit more value in our check back range in case our opponent decides to start stabbing more often. So if we had to pick hands to check back with, I think the best candidate would be aces because it has an equity lock. So an overcard can't come off and ruin our hand. So checking back with hands that have big equity locks is good some of the time. That brings us down to about 20 combos. Now some people are like, why don't you check back with top set? Because it makes it way less likely that your opponent flopped top pair. And my argument against that is that I don't need a hand that strong in my check back range to defend against an opponent that likes to stab the turn a lot. This hand is so much stronger than his range that I would rather throw it into my c-betting range in case he decided to do something tricky like flat my 3-bet with aces, kings, and queens. Then I'm going to get 3 streets of value from him for sure. And the times that he decides to go crazy with a hand like 6-4 and check raise me, or let's say he flopped middle or bottom set, I want to make sure I get all 300 big blinds in against him, and the best way to do that is to just c-bet it and instead take a hand like aces and check back with it. So now when I check back with aces, you see that I have exactly 20 combos of a value c-bet range. And on this board, I like to have about a 3-to-1 ratio of air to value. And I'll show you why here. So if I had to take a whole c-betting range and kind of throw it together, I think it would look something like this. Keep in mind that these are weighted. So I'll show you how this works here. I'm checking back aces like I said, and I'm c-betting kings, queens, jacks, and ace jack for value. I'm also going to c-bet ace king and ace queen that have a backdoor flush draw. I'm going to check back the aces that don't have a backdoor flush draw, and that ends up balancing things out. So I have enough ace high in my check back range that has showdown value, and I'm going to fold it to a turn bet. And I also have enough ace high in my betting range, and it has a little bit of extra equity so that I can maybe fire another barrel if I pick up a backdoor flush draw. And the same goes for all these other hands here. So if I have a gut shot, I'm definitely firing with that because it gives me 4 outs to win the whole pot 100% of the time. So that's something that I definitely want to fire with. If I have a backdoor flush draw with an overcard, I'd also like to fire with those. And the times that I flop an open-ender or a gut shot with 7-4, 6-4, and 7-6, of course I'm firing with those. And I'm also firing with backdoor flush draws and gut shots, pure backdoor flush draws, and sometimes a pair and a backdoor flush draw. Now I'm also going to be checking back 5s a decent amount of the time to add some value to my check back range. I keep stressing that quite a bit because when ranges are really wide here, it's going to be difficult to balance and have a decent amount of value in both your c-betting and check back range. You really have to be cognizant of what your range looks like, otherwise you're going to have huge inconsistencies, and anybody that's paying attention is either going to start check raising you more often or start stabbing turns more often if you don't balance well. So it's important to take hands like a 5 here. It's important to take hands like aces and occasionally check them back, and then also have some ace high. So your showdown value is tiered into 3 groups. You have hands like ace high that you're going to check back with and fold to 1 bet. You have hands like 5s that you're going to check back on the flop and call 1 bet. And then you have hands like aces and hands that pick up 2 pair or pick up a big draw that you're either calling 3 street or calling the turn and river with, or turning into value or a semi bluff. And that's kind of how you create a decent defense against people that stab the turn quite a bit. And at the same time, this is a pretty balanced c-betting range here. Your opponent can't go crazy by check raising you a lot on this board. If he decides to, let's say that the pot is 18 big blinds and you 3-bet, or 3-bet, that's not a word, and you c-bet 9 big blinds. If your opponent wants to check raise you, let's say he's going to use standard size like 27 big blinds, so now he's risking 27 big blinds to win 27 big blinds. He needs you to fold half of the time to make a snap profit. So all you need to do is take the 75 combos that you're c-betting with and cut that in half, and that's how much you would need to be defending if he decides to just take his whole range and check raise with it. So this is what a check raise defense range would look like for you. And you can see that it's pretty easy to defend against a check raise, because you just take all your value hands and defend with those. You take your gut shots with overcards and backdoor flush draws, and you take your pairs with overcards and backdoor flush draws, and you would either call with those or 3-bet with them. And you do the same with gut shots and backdoor flush draws that you create with your suited connectors. And it's really easy to defend against a check raise. Now, the thing that is very important to understand is that your opponent doesn't have any incentive really to be check raising on this board. There's no reason for him to try and develop a check raise range, because if he flops top pair, he's pretty much always going to get more value by allowing you to try and bluff again on the turn. So check calling is a good option for him. If he flops a set, you definitely have way more air in your c-betting range, so he's incentivized to just check call and allow you to continue firing. So there's really no reason for him to be check raising on this board. He's just sacrificing value, and so if he's sacrificing value by check raising big hands, then his check range is really just all air, and that allows you to 3-bet the flop. So you kind of see how that works. The guy in position is firing, and the guy out of position is defending. That's kind of how Hold'em works. So if this kind of analysis is something that you guys like and you feel like you're gaining a lot from it, let me know in the comment box, and I'll make another video kind of breaking down how I develop a 5-bet range in this spot, and also how I balance my turn betting and river betting range in this spot. If you guys don't like this, you think it's just way over your heads and way too complicated and you'd like me to do something else, just let me know. I've never really done a video that goes this far in depth before, and I'm just interested to hear what you guys have to say. So again, I'm Hunter Sitchy from CheckShowPoker.com. Make sure that you guys run good, have fun, and constantly look for ways to improve.